An Encyclopedia Britannica in the second grade. So in the 90s, I recalled Encyclopedia Britannicas being like a big thing for like the middle class families to get for their kids, right? So it's like the latest and greatest educational tool. And I think it was like the second grade, was looking through it and I saw a transparency that had like the body. So I always was a curious kid, always asking questions why. Most kids ask questions why, but I like kept asking questions why for my whole life, and I still do. I saw a transparency of the body, and I saw a transparency of the brain, a little slide, and wrote a paper, like my little second grade paper about the three parts of the brain. So it just made me think about biology. And then in middle school, I learned that the brain controls human behavior. So my thinking was like, if I'm always asking why people do what they do, and now I know the brain controls it, if I learn the brain, I can figure it out, right? Then I can understand people. So that was in middle school. I'm from Augusta, Georgia. We would take trips to Atlanta, which is the capital of Georgia. And one of those trips, we, as the classroom, we just had lunch at Emory University. So me being a little overachieving seventh grader, I used the AOL, the free internet, and I saw they had a neuroscience major, and I was like, oh, I got to do this. That was like seventh grade, seventh or eighth grade. I enjoyed the intellectual rigor of being like a researcher, right? So I enjoyed thinking about what are interesting problems. I enjoyed, writing papers and going to conferences, but I didn't see myself being 75 with an endowed chair and feeling good. So just the prospect of a career in academia didn't fit me in my heart, right? I liked the intellectual side of it. I liked problem solving, but I didn't see a life in academia with like grants and papers. I
Hmm.
began to become more interested in the business side of research. So I thought, what do people who understand biotechnologies, what do they do outside of academia? So I just started asking questions and like figuring it out. So I started hanging out around the B school some more at Kellogg at Northwestern. And I saw that, there's scientists who work with business folks and they can understand their research, but they can apply it to a market and that can become something. So that
Right.
commercialization process became more interesting to me than doing the bench research. So that kind of was in the middle of my PhD. So I started to just like gain more skills in biotechnology commercialization. What's a market assessment? What's competitive analysis? What's the regulatory strategy for your um, TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation device that might help stroke, right? So I started to connect those dots more closely and think about the business side of biotechnology, which led me into consulting. Because
Mm.
consultants, they problem solve in a business context, and I wanted to make sure I was in the life sciences industry. I'm in Applied Life Sciences Solutions, ALSS, and that group focuses on pharmaceutical R&D as well as like patient services. So everything from preclinical, clinical, regulatory, all the way to when the drug is getting ready to enter the market.
Okay.
So my particular focus right now is in regulatory. So I answer questions around, what's the best business process to accelerate your regulatory strategies? How do you
Right.
manage your content? How do
Hmm.
you build globally harmonized ways of working so you can get medicines to patients faster? I'm excited about the industry's appetite for change. Let me just say
Okay.
it like that. Um, Organizations continue to be, I guess in the last 10 years, healthcare has been disrupted. Organizations continue to ask us as consultants to not just solve for them today, but it's almost like two tomorrows. So I
Hmm.
think Accenture does a really good job at that in terms of like designing like next generation, almost like everything. So in the life sciences, what does that look like? It looks like less time for people doing stuff that could be automated. Because
Right.
with that, you can better manage your clinical trial and figure out you can fail faster. Does the compound work or not? Right? does it work in this indication or not, right? You can fail faster. And with those insights, you can apply that forward to get the treatments to the patients faster. So I'm excited about the appetite that I see in the industry for that kind of change.
Mm-hmm.
And I, specific to kind of the women in bio connection, for me, my role, I work only in life sciences, so that's only pharmaceutical companies and biotechnology companies. My client right now is a biotechnology company, so they think a little differently than like a Titan kind of big pharma,
Yeah.
right? Um, so with that mindset, I think it's super cool to make the connection with the Women in Bio organization, because what that does, the main goal of Women in Bio is to say, who are our women leaders in these organizations and how can they continue to develop their careers? So it's actually broader than that. It's not just working women, but it's also like young women, right?
Mm-hmm.
So young girls, right? High school girls. And then it's also like executives. So it's like that full scope of a young woman to a woman, right? And how she might connect to biotechnology. Um, so that's part of like its pipeline development. Is how do we get women to connect to like the most forward thinking parts of our industry? So that excites me. I mean, I can give you the stock answer, right? Like diversity of perspectives
Mm-hmm.
adds to the business bottom line, which I think is true, right? But I think it's more. I think it's also around just thinking about how do we empower like one half of the workforce,
Mm-hmm.
right? How do we engage young girls who might have pivoted away from science and math for whatever reason, right? And we see that cutoff kind of happen in middle school. So where I became even more interested, many other young girls, their interest declines around middle school. So it's like if we are expecting to build a world where there is personalized medicine, where there is more equity in our health outcomes, like we have to engage one half of the workforce because they're one half of the people. And their perspectives should be at the table in all industries, but importantly, the industry that's most closely connected to life, right? Bio, life, it's healthcare, it's fueling, it's feeding. So we have to have those perspectives along the way. I come from a really close knit family. I'm a Southern girl. I went to a fine arts magnet high school, right? So I had a particular educational experience where you're esteemed for, learning, and like it was a, pretty high standard academic environment in school and in home and in the home.
Mm-hmm.
So super high expectations of my family still.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, "Oh, you got a PhD! Congratulations! What's next?" I'm like, "What? This is 6 years, people." No, but it was just a part of me. They knew Azurii was always asking questions. So they're like, "She's going to be asking questions, and she'll figure it out."
Mm-hmm.
And I did. No, they were exceptionally proud. There wasn't any like resistance in my household about like career path. It was like, be a person of integrity, be a person of faith, that, be a stand up person and go change the world. So,
Yeah.
yeah. I think it's coupled with, you know, strong advocates along my educational journey.
Okay.
And then I'll even think about too, not just kind of my gender identity, but also my racial identity, right? So, for example, at Emory in my freshman year, there was a fellowship program for minority students who are interested in behavioral research as well as brain. So that was a specific grant just targeting minorities. And the woman who led that program was a PhD in neuroscience herself, and she is an African American woman. So I immediately had visual cues that like a girl can do this, a black woman can
Brilliant.
do this,
Yeah.
right? And it's not to say that success is totally dependent on like seeing someone who looks like you in that space, but it definitely creates an environment where there's a connection. And I'll juxtapose
Mm-hmm.
that to in my PhD work. Um, I don't know, but perhaps part of my disconnection in thinking about myself long term as an academic, maybe that was related to some of the visual cues just in the practice. Maybe I hadn't thought about that. Maybe. I can't put my finger on a particular incident where, for example, I might have felt like I didn't get that because I was a woman or I didn't get that because I'm Black. I can't point to a particular experience on that
Mm,
necessarily. Um, Not to say that it might not have been implicit.
mm-hmm.
Um, but I think about even now, just being in Chicago, what I'm experiencing is like geographical limitations. So biotechnology is much more dense in the Northeast and then California, San
Right.
Francisco, as an industry. And even though Chicago has the corridor of pharmas in the north suburbs, there is still yet not a fully activated, if you will, biotechnology center here. So that's part of what me as an individual professional, I want to be a part of that, those like that galvanizing community to develop that in Chicago and the Midwest.
Yeah.
So then I envision myself at 75 having this reflection story to say, I was in Chicago in the early 2000s, where Chicago was now and where Chicago is today is much better because of efforts like myself and other leaders. So that's the vision that I see. No, of course, I love mentoring grad undergrads. Typically, kind of when people know you're from a certain school and you're in consulting, right? There's interest just from a career connection, right? So a lot of PhDs reach out to me and they say, "Hey, Azurii, how can you help me learn how to make that transition into consulting?" So I do a lot of career development kind of chats and talks with different organizations, as well as just folks who are connected to me somehow. And I love that. I love the
Mhm.
mentoring piece. I love the sharing my story piece. And honestly, it's really about, in my opinion, helping folks dream, right? Because oftentimes, particularly PhD students, it's such an isolating experience. They don't even realize how much talent and how much value that skill set is in the academic market, but also in the more commercial market, right? So I even have to shape and even help them learn their own, professional value, not a person value, of course, but their own professional value. And even just connect those dots and you can hear them almost like being lifted, because they never really thought about that before. So I enjoy that a lot. Always strive for excellence, always exhibit excellence. And now that doesn't mean you have to have all A's every like that's not analogous with perfection, right? For me,
Right.
perfection is a hoax, right? Like I personally don't feel called in my life to be perfect because I don't think that's humanly possible. But excellence says that, you know, with each and every space that you commit your time and your energy, whether or not that's professional or even personal, do it in a way that's consistent with your values and do it to the best of your ability. So my dad always told me like, is there, you're no better or you're no worse than anyone, right? So he was trying to
Mhm.
raise a humble young woman, right, who also was confident.
Right.
So, he anytime I was being a crabby little, hormonal teenager, there was this reckoning of my parents and they were like, oh, you're complaining about this, Azurii? Do we need to go? You need to, get on your service projects in the next couple of weeks. So it was always a balancing for me. You're very fortunate, you're very blessed. You're no better, no worse than anyone. So
Yeah.
it was a grounding that I still carry. But even within that spirit, it's like, always operate with excellence. So there is an expectation that you're treating people with respect. You are pushing yourself to the best of your ability. You're giving yourself grace, right? Which I've
Hmm.
learned in my 30s. I didn't know
Hmm.
that in my 20s. Learning about giving yourself grace in my 30s. So yeah, I just say, do everything with excellence. Life is unpredictable.
Hmm.
There's so much outside of our control. There's probably this much that's within our control. And so stuff's going to happen. You're not going to get something. Someone's going to break your heart. You're going to lose people. You're going to lose relationships.
Hmm.
And so, when you're a self-starter, fast going high schooler and you're getting everything, you think that's how the world works.
Right.
No, no, no. Right. And so when you get to these instances where, I didn't win that scholarship or I didn't get that paper accepted or I didn't get my first jobs when I was applying for consulting,
Hmm.
how do you manage that?
Right.
Right? You beat yourself up forever because you assume you're going to get everything all the time? Or do you give yourself grace to say, maybe this opportunity is not for me. I'm going to keep working. Maybe that person's not for me. That doesn't lose, everything of who I am. Like, don't let it crush you, but use the quote unquote failure, as an opportunity just to reflect and keep moving.